He lost a previous bid for re-election. His mother was a member of the teachers union, and his musical hero is a liberal Democrat. Who are we talking about? No one other than the New Jersey Governor, Chris Christie. And you can find out more tidbits like those and much more in the new book, Chris Christie, the inside story of his rise to power. Joining me now are the authors, Bob Ingle and Michael Simons. Welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, in reference to the intro, we should say that Chris Christie's mother was a teacher, and his musical icon, of course, Bruce Springsteen. And for many who didn't know about the re-election bid he lost more than 10 years ago, what was that all about?
Right. He was a Morris County freeholder for one term in the 1990s. He had tried for state legislature when there was already a Republican incumbent, tried for county freeholder, and won when there was already a Republican incumbent. So from the very beginning, he was sort of pushing his way into politics, not necessarily at a time that he was invited, and sort of continued on that same sort of path. Some clashes with fellow Republicans in Morris County, so he served one term, and then they wouldn't even renominate him for a second term. They thought rather gleefully that they had ended his political career right as it started.
But that certainly, of course, did not stop him. I mean, he really did become this political powerhouse, didn't he?
He came back, and one of the things we said was, well, now that you're governor, how about all those people who tried to bury you politically? And guess what? They're all friends now.
What kind of access did you have to the governor when it came to writing this book?
We got to speak with him a number of times. He was very helpful, and we got to speak with his wife, his dad, his brother, a number of, his uncle we even got to speak with, who lives out in California. So it was very helpful. It kind of turned the book around. We originally thought the book was going to be much more of a purely political book, and getting to talk with them, you kind of learn a lot about the way he grew up, and some of that gets reflected now, and even the way that he continues to conduct himself. It's okay to argue with people with whom you have a friendship, or with whom with your family. That's not a character flaw, and you still kind of see that in the way that he takes on folks today.
Well, we're used to seeing this self-assured, brash side of him, of course, in front of the camera. But what's he like behind closed doors?
Self-assured and brash. No, the Christie that you see is really the Christie that you get. Now, sometimes I think in person he's funnier. He has a terrific sense of humor, and that doesn't always come out. But pretty much when you're talking to him and there's nobody else in the room but you and him, he's pretty much the same.
Now, people have often said that his weight is a sign of lack of self-discipline. How does he feel about that? And what people say?
Right, yeah, he's very sensitive to people saying that. I mean, he knows that he's overweight. I think the way that he put it to us when we talked about it, said, I have a mirror, so I get it. But he doesn't like when people make that connection next, that if you're overweight, then that must mean that you don't have any self-discipline. So I think that stereotype bothers him. I mean, in lots of ways, the way that overweight people get treated that way is sort of like the last bias that people are allowed to have and to express openly.
What has been the biggest struggle for him in terms of his political career?
I think probably was what Mike was just talking about, getting over that image that somehow, because of his weight, that he's not disciplined, or people maybe think that he is lazy, neither of which is true. I can tell you from personal experience, we've covered him for more than 10 years, and the man is like the Energizer Bunny. He just keeps going. But I think overcoming some of that, and there have been times like when he was nominated to be the U.S. Attorney, there were a lot of people who came down on him, a lot of people in government who said, well, really he has no background in law enforcement. This guy can't be a U.S. attorney. And then look what happened. By the time he got out, there probably will never be another U.S. attorney that has the kind of record that he has.
Now, in his 2 years as governor, he's become a national political star, and of course has really been launched onto the national political stage. What are your thoughts on that?
I think because he's blunt and can take a complicated problem and boil it down in ways that people can connect with. Critics would say that he oversimplifies a problem in an attempt to make a point sometimes, but he communicates in a way that people can connect with, and that people think, oh, that's the kind of response I would like to have if somebody, if I was in that same position. And so I think that people like to think that they see some of themselves in some of that. Even when the exchanges sometimes get a little bit fierce, it almost speaks to the part of somebody saying, I wish at that particular moment I could think of that kind of a comeback. So I think that people identify with that.
There was so much speculation over whether or not he would run for president. Do you think the decision was right for him at the time?
Well, he thinks that the decision not to run was right at the time, and I guess he would be the one who really knows. But running for president is a 365-day, 24/7 kind of a thing. And he's a big family man. This is something that not everybody knows about him. And at first, the family didn't want him to do it. And he said, well, I'm a relatively young man. I'm going to have plenty of time. I can do it later on. And then later on in the process, his wife says to him early one morning, you know, if you want to do this, it's okay. Go ahead. We'll survive. And, of course, it was a little late at that time. But he has, whatever he decides to do, if he wants to run next time around, he's going to be in good shape to do it, I think.
What was the biggest surprise for you when you learned, that you learned in the research for the book?
Well, I mentioned earlier, we thought that the book was going to be much more of a purely political book about the time that he got into Morris County politics and then resurrected himself sort of with his work as U.S. attorney. A lot of the family background stuff was really interesting. I mean, you kind of can see how a lot of sort of the passionate, emotional side of him is very reflective of his mother's influence. A lot of the analytical side and the intelligence and even the take on some policy stuff, you see a lot of his father's influence there. So I guess everybody is kind of a reflection of their parents, but we thought the book was going to be more political, so finding out some of that personal stuff was interesting and unexpected.
Okay, if the book becomes a movie, who plays Chris Christie?
Oh, gosh. Who's the fellow that did him on Saturday Night Live? He did a really good job. A little young for it, but, you know, by the time it becomes a movie, maybe he'll be about the right age.
What do you think?
You know, I haven't cast that yet.
Thank you both so much for joining
bet.
us. Next, a change to the tanning ban proposal in the Garden State. That and more when New Jersey Now continues. Stay